When connecting a filter system, ideally you want to put it after your pressure protection valve on your incoming line, just so you don't get pressure spikes coming through damaging the filter system. In our case here, we've got some other valves before it. The other valves is for the backup water tank, where we want the maximum amount of pressure in there. So that's just for if we have intermittent water supply that the house keeps getting fed. So after your pressure protection valve, you basically want three valves. One is a bypass. So in this case, the water can go straight through into the house. And then if we close it like it is now, then we want another loop to be able to divert the water through the filter system. So this one is feeding water through to our filter system, and then this pipe coming here, and this valve is feeding water back into the house from the filter system. What we found is it's easiest is, if you want to do a DIY, is to let a plumber just do your connection setup with the bypass valves for where you want to connect onto, and then from there use these PVC glue fittings, as they are really easy to work with on a DIY basis. And if you include enough of these unions, which is a quick disconnect, it makes it very easy to just, if you have a mistake in a section of pipe, to just disconnect that section of pipe and redo that section of pipe. We've got a full range of these PVC fittings available, and you can pretty much do all of this piping in the PVC fittings. It just depends a little bit on your connection setup, from where you would want to do it or not. Okay, now when changing filters, here we've got our valve set up leading to the filter system. This is our bypass valve. This is our valve to the filter system, and behind here is our valve to the house. So first thing you want to ensure is that your geyser is switched off, just for in case you're going to drain the water out of the geyser. But then next step you want to do is close off the water going to the filter system and just release the pressure in there. There we go, and I can hear the pressure is dropping. And that will just allow us to open the filter housings easier if they're not under pressure. You can also release the pressure through the little bleed valve on top of the big blue units, but it's easier if you've got a tap connected. Then I'm going to close the valve going to the house as well, and this will just prevent the water from the geysers and everything flowing back through to the filter system. If you're going to do longer maintenance, you can now then choose to open your bypass valve for the system if you need to have water in the house running, like for example if you're busy have a dishwasher or a washing machine running while you're changing filters. Alternatively, you just leave the bypass closed, close both valves, and then you can go on to your maintenance for the system. So choosing the correct filter set for your situation can be quite a daunting task, but we try to make it as simple as possible with predetermined sets, but you can always customize it if you want. At my house specifically here, I've got a small disc filter, which is a washable 55 micron filter before the actual big blue unit. This is a silver big blue. So what we're going to do is, instead of using a normal sediment filter, we're going to go for the antibacterial 1 micron. And the main reason for that is that this one has silver embedded in the plastic, which prevents bacteria from sitting on the filter and growing there. Similar to that, on the carbon, you get silver nanocarbon, which is the same effect. But here where we are, we actually have quite high chlorine levels often. So we're not too concerned about bacteria growing in the carbon filter, but we want to remove all of that chlorine. And because we want to have 3 different filters in here, what we're actually using here is we're using the 1,000 milligram iodine absorption carbons, which both of these are, but the one without the silver is quite a bit less expensive, as they basically have more than double the absorption capacity of the standard carbon blocks you would have. So in effect, using one of these higher end filters almost changes it as to having 4 filters, as it basically does the function of 2 of the normal carbons. Then for the final stage, we want to have a barrier in place for bacteria. Now we have 2 options. We have the normal 0.1 micron, which is a nominal rated, which means on average it will take out 0.1 micron particles, which means on average it will take out most of the bacteria. And this one here is an absolute rated cartridge. It's typically mainly used in the medical industry, but we had them specially made in the big blue form factor, so you can use it as on a house, which this gives you a very definite barrier for bacteria. Now, if you know you've got a lot of bacteria problems, we always recommend a double barrier approach, as no barrier is perfect. But in this case here, we know it's only intermittently that we do get a bit of bacteria. And basically what we just wanted to do is, if we do get a batch of bacteria coming through, we want to be fairly sure we stop it at this absolute 0.1 micron filter. And then if that happens, we're probably going to have to replace the carbon filter, because the carbon will get saturated with bacteria, but at least it shouldn't get through into the house. Okay, so when changing the filters, one of the first things that people often forget is they're actually covered in a layer of plastic, and we very often get people who contact us saying, no, there's no water coming through, and then the plastic films were not removed. So first step, remove the plastic film. Okay, then once you've got your filters ready, as you saw with the valves, we've already released the pressure. You can also use these little red pressure release valves, because there's a little bit left. We've got pressure gauges before and after on this unit, which helps, so you can actually see if there's still pressure in the system. It's down to about half a bar, so it's a little bit, but that shouldn't be enough to really cause an issue of the housings holding themselves in place. So there, now we're down to 0 on the pressure gauges. Then let's take our filters out of the way here. Now, initially, this is a new filter installed, so we haven't got old filters to take out. So initially, we want to put in the sediment filter and the carbon filter, and then first flush them before putting the 0.1 micron filter. This isn't strictly necessary, but what it gives you is it just gives you extra life on that 0.1 micron filter because it's not having to catch the carbon dust coming out of the carbon filter. Now, whenever tightening or loosening the housings, ideally, when you tighten, just hand tighten. Normally, the seals are good enough to seal without using the spanner. Because if you use the spanner, a few months down the line, you tend to struggle to open these housings again. Now, these will be full of water now. And the tricky thing to do is just to keep untighten them in a way where you are applying some force upwards, because as soon as they get out of the thread, they're going to drop down. There we go. And this water we're just pouring out. Side. Now, something to check when you're doing, if it isn't a new housing, is what the condition of the O-rings feel like. If they're nice and soft and squishy, you should be fine just to use them as is. If they feel a little bit hard, then you might want to take a little bit of something like Vaseline and just apply it to the seal. This will just allow it to seal easier when you're putting it back together again. So we're taking our sediment filter. These get dirty from the outside going in. So at the moment it's completely clean, but you see they'll change color over time. So if you open it up for a filter change and you find that, oh, it's only dirty a quarter of the way, you can probably keep using that filter. Then the housing itself has a pin in the middle, which you just want to make sure the filter goes over, but it's fairly easy to do. And then same thing at the top of the housing here. It's got a little guide to guide it to go in the correct place. Yeah, just want to lift it up with one hand and turn it with the other hand. Just get a little bit closer here. Oops, like there. I managed to knock the O-ring off. Just make sure if that happens that you seat the O-ring back in. After a few turns, it'll connect, and then you can just turn it in. And if you're hand tightening, you can tighten it properly tight by hand, as that should be sufficient. The spanners you can always use, but we always say first just try a hand tighten before you use the spanner. If you use the spanner, you just make your life more difficult when it comes time to change the filters. Then next, we take our carbon filter. On the carbon blocks, make sure that both of the seals are in place, as if they're not, you're going to get water bypassing the actual filter. And again, make sure, see, they come off like that. Just make sure it's in place, make sure it's seated in the housing. Oops. And that's something to be careful of. What happened there is I dropped it, and the O-ring managed to bounce off and fall inside the housing. Make sure it's seated again. Seated, seals in place. Okay, let's take the thread. Just tighten it. Okay. And now we want to just flush these first two filters first. So what we want to do for that is we want to open the water supply back to the filter system and open it to the house, and then let a tap run. And then you want to keep flushing that tap until you're not getting any black dust coming through from the carbon. Once you're not getting any dust through from the carbon, we then close our incoming supply again, and you can leave it open to the house, and then again just release the pressure from the system to be able to open the final housing. So that pressure is dropping. Then we close the connection going to the house, and now your filter system is completely isolated again. And then you can open the final housing to install the 0.1 micron filter. So now we've flushed the first filters. The nice thing of these premium carbons and the silver carbons, the high quality carbons, make very, very little dust. So now we only have the last one to install. So just release pressure again there by the valve, but just want to release the last little bit of pressure here. Okay, and then we're down to basically no pressure on the pressure gauges. And then we can insert our last filter here. Emptying out that water. And then we take the absolute cartridge. Again, just check that the seal surfaces are in place. Make sure it's seated. And again, hand tighten. Okay, once that's tightened, let's open up the water supply, and then we just want to release any air coming out from the system. So you can hear the water starting to flow in here now. Pressure lifting. We can just check for any air left in the system. Okay, there's a bit of air coming now. Water, water, water. Okay. So now we've got the filters installed, and yes, then we just need to make sure the valves are set correctly for use in the house. Now that all the filters are changed, now what you can do again is we can slowly put pressure back in on the system and set it open to flow back to the house as well. What you will probably find is as you run the taps, you will find some air bubbles coming through. So it's a good idea to pick a tap which is quite far down the line, like in a furthest away bathroom, and just run the cold water line for a few minutes until you're not seeing bubbles coming through. The bubbles will give you sort of a squirt almost of water as they're coming through. Once you're not seeing bubbles coming through anymore, then you can turn your geyser back on again, and then you're ready to go.